So thank you very much, Your Grace, Reverend Bishops, Reverend Fathers, dear friends of Aid to the Church in Need. I really am very grateful to have this opportunity today because I believe that I have the duty in the job that I do to be a voice for the voiceless Christians in many parts of the world, and today in particular for those voiceless Christians of the Middle East. And indeed, it's something that Aid to the Church in Need has always tried to do. And when I was preparing to come here, I was looking through some of the archives we have on our projects in the Middle East, and I found that already in Iraq, in the beginning of the 1960s, the Christians were caught in the middle between the Kurds, who were fighting for their autonomy, and the Baghdad government at that time. And in November 1964, Bishop John Rice, who was bishop of the Diocese of Sakho, which is up in the far north of Iraq, up on the border with Turkey, wrote us a very moving letter telling us how the Christians had been driven from their homes had been destroyed, the churches had been ransacked, they were starving. Even some of the Christians gave away their children because they didn't know how to care for them. And he himself had been imprisoned first by the Kurds and then by the Baghdad government. And at that time, it was a plea to us to help, to give some emergency help. And we were there again in 1991, the Gulf War, where thousands of Christian families fled into Syria, into Jordan, into Lebanon, and then on to the United States or Australia. Again, 2003, the fall of Saddam Hussein, the Christians became the targets of radical Muslims. Hundreds of thousands fled Baghdad at that stage to go back to the north, to Kurdistan, to the Nineveh plain, where they came from, and then on again to Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, United States to Australia. And those people were gone forever. And now this recent crisis now that started in June 2014, where they were on the move again. In between these crises, we were helping the Christians, especially the Catholic Church in Iraq, for the normal Aid to the Church in Need projects. We were helping them train their seminarians, do catechetical projects. We were helping them repair their centuries-old churches. Because don't forget, this is an ancient church. They say that the first Christians, the first Catholics were baptized in Iraq by St. Thomas the Apostle on his way to India. And in Mosul, you have the ruins of the first monastic settlement going back to the 2nd century. So just imagine how long these people have lived. This is their homeland. It's, as we said before, it's very difficult to have figures in the Middle East, not only in the Middle East, in other countries as well, but regarding the number of Christians, it was thought that before the fall of Saddam Hussein, there were maybe between 1.3 and 1.5 million. Before this present crisis in June, if there were 300,000 or 450,000, that was a lot. So just to give you an idea of where we are today. Perhaps just to remind you, this current emergency situation or crisis started in Mosul on the 10th of June, when the 60,000 strong Iraqi troops left Mosul and the 3,000 members of ISIS, the Islamic State, walked into Mosul. At that time, there was a wave of Christians ran to a number of Christian villages to the east of Mosul, Kara, Kosh, Tel Keif, places like that. And we contacted the Archbishop of Mosul, Monsignor Emil Nona, to ask him at that stage what we could do to help. And he asked us for money. We gave him £80,000 at that stage to get water, food, blankets, things like that, for these people who were moving into the villages. The inhabitants who were there were being as generous as they could, but they were overwhelmed. On the 19th of July, the ultimatum came for those Christians who still lived in Mosul, either to convert, to pay the Islamic tax, to leave, or to face the sword. So that's when you had the second major wave of Christians leaving Mosul. Again, they went to these Christian villages, either to the east or to the north of Mosul. And then on the 7th of August, the Peshmerga, who are the Kurdish troops who were protecting these Christian villages, Karakosh, Tel Kiev, and so on, then they ran away, or they realized that they couldn't stop ISIS coming. And that's when we had this third major flux of refugees leaving. About 120,000 Christians at that stage either went to Erbil or went to the north of Dohuk. And again, we intervened to see what we could do. We gave £80,000 at that stage. But through calling, we talked, I was on the phone to the patriarch of the Chaldean Church, the biggest Catholic group in Iraq, Patriarch Sacco, and talking to the nunciature as well. And what we felt was, what was really coming through to us was a sense of abandonment by the Christians. Thank goodness, and thanks be to God, they didn't suffer the plight of the Yazidis, many of whom were massacred. But for them, the result was that people ignored completely that there were Christians in Iraq and that their survival there was threatened. So at that stage, a delegation of us from the International Secretariat in Germany, there were 3 of us, went out on the 12th of August to Erbil to show our sense of solidarity, to understand better the situation, because it was very, very confusing, and just to see how we could help. And as Neville mentioned, John Pontifex will say afterwards, he's joined our second delegation, which just went now to Iraq. How we're helping at the moment is, as I mentioned, there's the Patriarch of the Chaldean Church, but there are many different other Catholic churches in Iraq, and they have formed a committee. There's a committee of bishops which oversees the help that's sent. And what we have looked at this last week and in this coming days are a list of about 13 short-term projects. And I'm not going to go down the whole 13 projects for you now, but just to give you an idea of what we're doing now is helping to erect prefabricated schools in Erbil and then also north of Mosul, prefabricated because nobody knows what's going to happen. Are the Christians going to stay there? Many want to go back to the villages, many want to leave. So we are spending about over £500,000 on that. We're continuing to help train the seminarians. We're giving £30,000 for that. And also, for Christmas, there are about 15,000 children affected by this who are displaced, and we want to prepare for them Christmas packages, Christmas gifts, which would be a mixture of some clothes, some sweets, some toys, but also our little child's Bible we hope to send to them in Arabic. And then mass intentions for the priests, and existence help for the sisters, because they also have become refugees. Bishop Nona himself, the Archbishop of Mosul, is a refugee. He wasn't even in Mosul at the time. He was holding a retreat outside, so he left with whatever he had in his pockets those days. But of course, I think what happens, we have a hard time coping with more than one crisis in a time. I mean in general in our societies. And I have a feeling that the situation in Syria has almost been forgotten, this tragedy which continues in Syria. We received a report just last week from Father Ziad Hilal, who's a Jesuit working in Homs. He works very closely with the Jesuit Refugee Service. And Father Ziad has been there through the whole crisis. He was, until earlier this year, accompanied by an elderly Dutch missionary, Father Hans, who stayed in the old city of Homs during the siege and would not leave, even though he had the opportunity to go. And at the end, sadly, he was murdered, he was assassinated. Now, the information we have at the moment is about 50% of the Syrian population is in need of humanitarian help. We're talking about 10 million people, probably. And 5.5 million of those are children. There are probably something like 6 to 6.5 million internally displaced, and then another 3 million refugees in other countries. Father Ziad told us that probably in the last 2 months, The needs in Homs themselves have increased by about 15% because ISIS has been chasing, the Christians have been fleeing ISIS from the northern part, the northeastern part of Syria. And every day they're feeding about 2,000 families in Homs alone. And that's just Homs. We work in Syria. We try to work with the different churches, but our main focus would be on Aleppo, on Homs, and what we call the Valley of the Christians, which is over towards Lebanon. And the type of help we're giving is mainly for, well, food, for renting houses for these displaced people, the school fees, it's very important. The Christians in the Middle East in general are well-educated people, and the parents place a lot of importance on providing good education for their children. Even if they're displaced, even if they're Christians, this is really important for them. And then clothing and so on. We have a few projects at the moment in the pipeline for winter, because winter is very hard. We imagine these countries are all hot and sunny, but they can be as cold, if not colder, than our countries in the winter. And then in Lebanon, which is Grace has mentioned already, our main partners there is the Melkite Bishop of Sahle, Bishop John Darwish, which is up towards the border with Syria, and also then the Good Shepherd Sisters. And there too, we are granting them help. So far this year, we've given about £160,000, and we will be giving more now also for winter, for food, for rent, pastoral care, trauma, and healing. And altogether this year, we've spent about 1.4 million, or 1.4 million pounds on providing help for Syria. Normally, our help would be for pastoral projects of all sorts, but it's almost impossible to do anything like that at the moment. And the final country I wanted to mention for the Middle East, which was also a very dramatic situation in July, is Gaza. And I think we all saw it on our TV screens, we saw it in the news. The auxiliary bishop of the Latin Patriarchate in Jerusalem, Bishop William Shomali, he wrote to us when it happened, and he asked us for help for the Christian hospitals and clinics in the Gaza. He asked us for fuel for the different Christian institutes, because even though the Christians are a very small minority, they're running hospitals, they're running schools, and also to repair the houses of the Christians. There are about 390 or 400 Christian households in Gaza, which makes up about 22% of all households. And he told us that after the bombing had stopped, about 88 of those houses had been damaged. Now, we heard just recently from a partner agency that we work with very closely in Jerusalem and in Gaza. They were finally allowed into Gaza just a couple of weeks ago, and they said it's total devastation. The situation is very extreme. The border is still closed, which means that very needed supplies, including building supplies, are not coming in. And this person said to us, he says, it'll be nothing short of a miracle that another bloody escapade and clash will come about, because the political situation has not been solved in that region. I said at the beginning of my short talk that I wanted to be the voice for the voiceless, and these photos are of mainly, they're all Iraqi refugees that we saw on our trip in August, and the pictures of destruction are Syria or Homs, and they're not the most recent. We're going to be getting some more this week. So I just wanted to say, that I think we all have a duty, not just myself, to be a voice for these people, because they have the feeling, and I have the feeling too, that a lot of people ignore that there are Christians still in the Middle East. And I think it is our duty to talk about this, to tell people what you hear today. We can also help them financially. That's also very much needed. But I think, too, we must really keep them all in our prayers. Thank you.